we have all of our attendees here. Aloha, everyone. Thank you. My name is Rob Haak. I'm with the Hawaii Pacific Export Council. Often we just go by the short acronym of HPEC. And I'm showing you here on the shared screen our YouTube channel, which has an archive of all of these videos, seminars, and webinars we've done in the past, of which this meeting will eventually get up to this YouTube channel in about I don't know, 4 or 5 days after I'm able to edit it a little bit and upload it. And then also I'd like to make it clear to everyone that I will be circulating a Dropbox link after the event today with a folder that has the 2 presentations and our agenda on it. So as you know, because you signed up for it, this is exporting to Vietnam, and we have some great speakers today. Stephen Jacques is calling in from Ho Chi Minh City. He's the U.S. Commercial Service Officer based at our embassy there. And we have Professor Tung Bui from the University of Hawaii Business School, Shidler, who will talk about doing business in Vietnam after Stephen. But at first, I'd like to introduce Jamie Lum from DBEDT. And we're very thankful to DBEDT and SBA because it's a grant that we receive every year that allows us to put on this series of seminars and webinars and perform one-on-one company mentoring sessions with our exporters in Hawaii. So thank you very much to SBA and DBEDT. And Jamie, please.
Rob, do you have this microphone on? I mean, I know we need to speak for Zoom, but can everyone hear?
I tried it. It was feedback, so I didn't want to do it.
Okay. All right.
Can you probably need to speak a little bit louder, because I know Rob was trying to speak to the people on the Zoom, right? But the rest of the audience will have a hard time hearing.
Okay.
Present now.
Great.
Yeah. Aloha, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. As Rob said, I'm Jamie Lum, and I'm with the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism. And our department is the administrator for the state's, what we call our Hawaii State Trade Expansion Program. It's primarily supported through a grant that we received from the Small Business Administration. And I want to recognize Hazel Beck, who is here with the SBA Hawaii District Office. They cover not only Hawaii, but throughout the Pacific, American Samoa, Guam, Northern Marianas, I don't know where else, that's just to name a few. So thank you to Hazel and her team and for their support. And thank you to Rob. We do work with partner organizations such as the Hawaii Pacific Export Council, with our local SBA office, with organizations like the Small Business Development Center and the Women's Business Center, otherwise known as the Mink Center, and the Veterans Business Opportunity Center, to help to put together this, what we call our ecosystem for companies that are interested in exporting. So HiSTEP, as we call it, is an export development program, and it consists primarily of 3 parts, which I will go through, but let me talk a little bit about what the whole point of the program is. It's for companies that are new to export. So if you've never exported before and you're interested in it, all the way to those companies that have already been exporting, but maybe want to expand to another market, or maybe have new products that they want to introduce in a market that they may already be in. So it's really for new to export all the way to what we call market expansion companies. It's open to Hawaii companies. We do give preference to companies that meet the Hawaii made, which is 51% of your product or your service. In order to qualify for STEP, it does have to be US made 51%. There are other qualifications, requirements for the companies to meet SBA's requirements, as well as the state. But we do have our, thank you, Rob. Rob has our website up, which is invest.hawaii.gov. Under the exporting tab, you'll see the information about HiSTEP. So it can give you all the information about the qualifications for the program, et cetera. So the three components we have are what we call our HiSTEP export readiness, which consists of sessions like this that are intended to give information to companies about either particular markets, in this case, exporting to Vietnam, or particular topics. Like the last one we did was the
Intellectual property.
Oh, intellectual property, right, and legal considerations for international business. We've had, we've done international trade shows, we've done export financing. We have that coming up, I think, in June.
Robert's helped us with exporting of services.
That's right. And I do want to make that point. I guess because most of the companies that participate are manufacturers, they produce products, but the program is also for companies that have services that are available to be exported.
And
so
agriculture.
Yeah, and for ag, value added, we cover a lot of different types of companies. So thank you for making that point, Rob. So with export readiness, we have these training sessions, but we also, the partner organizations that I mentioned in the beginning, they have generously contribute their time to help advise companies. So when a company registers for the program, then we partner them with one of these organizations for at least one session of one-on-one that you can talk with a business advisor about your company and what your export goals are, and they can help give you some advice and guide you, whether it's going to be participating in HiSTEP, or maybe there are some other things that you need to do as a company before you might even be ready to export. So those kinds of things. So that's all part of export readiness. Another component is our HiSTEP, what we call our Hawaii pavilions, where we have selected various international trade shows to participate in. And what we will do is we subsidize the majority of the cost of the show. We purchase a number of booths, and we recruit Hawaii companies to participate. The advantage to that is it helps make it affordable for companies to participate in these very large trade shows. And then also the advantage of being under the Hawaii brand and really going in as a group to show what kinds of products and services that Hawaii has to offer. So that's our Hawaii pavilions. We do have one event that we do, which is not a trade show, it's a consumer show. It's called the Hankyu Hawaii Fair. That's a little different in nature, but that is also part of our calendar of events. And this year we also have a pilot program that we are doing. It's an e-commerce platform called Makuake for the Japanese market. And we do have information on our website if you're interested in that as well. So all of that I would love we're going to look for a new, I think a new title for it next year, but we're right now calling it our Hawaii Pavilions. And then lastly, we have what we call our company assistance, which is where companies can apply directly to us for financial assistance to help support various elements and activities of your export plan. So that's kind of the key. You have to have an export plan and talk a little bit about what market is you want to get into, maybe a little bit about the lay of the land, demand for your particular product or service, how you intend to get into the market, and what activities you want to do. And that's on a competitive basis. And there's an evaluation committee involved in looking at all the proposals that come through. But that's what we call our financial assistance program. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to go to our website under the registration, and there's no cost to register. There's no obligation to participate in any of the activities. We simply want to get information about your company and where you're at sort of in your export journey. That way we can put you in touch with one of our partner organizations to kind of begin the process. And if you have any questions, I will be here all the way to the end. And thank you very much again for attending today.
Can you just talk a little bit about the next cycle and
Okay.
when they should apply?
Oh, okay, sure. So we're actually in the process right now of applying for our next STEP grant. We will be notified. The cycle of the program kind of follows the federal fiscal year cycle, which is kind of October to September. So we would be notified if we have another grant in September, and then we kind of start recruiting, going around and just promoting the program in October. In November, for those that are interested in company assistance, that's when we would have our applications available. So you can check our website. We'll have the application available in November, and then typically it's due in January, maybe about a week or two after the new year. So that you know what
We
the
usually
cycle
have
is.
kickoff events that'll trigger your memory if you don't
Right,
remember. now.
right, exactly. So as I said, in October, we do kickoff events. In the past, we have gone to the individual islands too. We had hoped to do that this year. Maybe we'll, last year. Hopefully we'll try to do that this year. But always, now everyone's used to either virtual or hybrid or something. So information will always be available on it. And we will go through it in more detail about what the program will entail for 2024. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Aloha.
much, Jamie. The HiSTEP program is just wonderful, and I encourage our companies to get involved in it as much as possible. Okay, I'm going to bring up the presentation for Stephen Jacques. Before I do that, while I have this browser open, I had a link here for the U.S. Commercial Service in Vietnam at trade.gov/Vietnam. So it's pretty easy to remember. But again, I'll include all of these links and things that we've discussed in our conversation email that I send out. Okay, let me get over to this presentation. Stephen Jacques from Ho Chi Minh City at the U.S. Embassy in Ho Chi Minh City. Can you say hello and just briefly introduce yourself and tell us how long have you been there, and I'll get your presentation going.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thanks, Rob. Well, aloha or xin chào from Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. My name is Stephen Jacques. I'm the Principal Commercial Officer at the U.S. Commercial Service Office at the U.S. Consulate General in Ho Chi Minh City. I've been in Vietnam for about 3 years. I arrived in 2020. I'm finishing up my tour this summer. I will be going over a PowerPoint presentation, but I'll be going over it fairly quickly. I want to have plenty of time for the second speaker and questions and answers. So I will just try to give a brief overview of how we look at the country, some of the major issues that we see, an introduction to our office, and then we'll mention 4 or 5 major industry sectors that we think have a lot of promise in the future. And then I'll conclude, but I'll stick around till the end of the webinar if there are any questions and answers.
Great. Can you see your presentation?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great. And
so
just,
we can go on. Yeah, we can go on to the next slide.
And I apologize when I said embassy. I meant to say consulate, and it just came
no worries. No worries. Okay, thank you. All right, well, here's some basic statistics about Vietnam, but really the main 2 points I would like to raise are, first of all, if you take a look at the first bullet point, it has a very large population of almost 100 million people. And in addition to the large population, it has a very favorable demographics compared to many other countries in Asia, particularly countries in Northeast Asia like Korea, Japan, and China, in that Vietnam has a very large youthful demographics. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of foreign direct investment is flooding into Vietnam. I'll talk about that in a later slide. But it has a very, very favorable population and demographics compared to many other countries in Asia. And also the population actually is fairly well educated as well. And then going on to economic growth, although it has a fairly low per capita income compared to other Asian countries like Japan or Korea or Singapore, for example, even other ASEAN countries, it's growing quite rapidly, and there is a rapidly developing middle class within Vietnam, which is helping to drive the economy. Vietnam suffered quite a bit due to COVID, and we'll talk about that in a little bit when we go into the supply chain problems that Vietnam was a part of. But it has rebounded since it closed down in 2020 and 2021 to outside businesses. and the lockdown here in Ho Chi Minh City in 2021 to growing around 8% recently. Although recently there have been some indications that growth is declining and there are some issues about factories being underutilized. But overall, it's seen as a very large, youthful, growing population, which is attracting a lot of interest, not only from US companies, but also countries from around the world, especially Korea, Japan, and Europe as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, well, the main thing is not to get overwhelmed with trade statistics, but the United States has a very large trade deficit with Vietnam that actually has been growing. And that's due to a variety of reasons, one of which is there are large numbers of consumer goods that are now manufactured in Vietnam that are exported to the US, particularly in the area of apparels, footwear, furniture, electronics. And one of the reasons for this is that investment is now being diverted from China to Vietnam, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a future slide. You'll see that it's grown to over $100 billion trade deficit. During the previous administration, there was a great deal of emphasis on the actual size of the trade deficit. The emphasis now is less on the size of the trade deficit, but on a program called IPATH, which we'll discuss very shortly. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, well, as I just briefly alluded to, Vietnam is attracting a great deal of foreign direct investment, especially from Korea and Japan, but as well as the US. Samsung has massive investments here, as do other Korean companies. The Japanese do as well in the area of consumer electronics and other areas. The US, we have a large amount of direct investment. The statistics might be a little bit misleading because a lot of the US direct investment actually flows through Singapore and other places rather than directly from the US. But US companies have a great deal of investment in Vietnam. These companies include Intel, Ashley Furniture, or here locally it's called Wannock. So much of Ashley Furniture or some furniture at your local Pottery Barn store are actually made in Vietnam. Nike Shoes has employs, believe it or not, almost 500,000 Vietnamese people, leading manufacturer of shoes and apparel. Hanes for clothing also is a very large employer in central Vietnam. What we are seeing now is that there is a shift of supply chains from China to other countries in the region, particularly the ASEAN countries of Southeast Asia, and Vietnam has been a beneficiary of this trend. The shift has been due to a variety of reasons, one of which is labor rates in China have been increasing over the past 10, 15, 20 years, so it's no longer the low-cost manufacturer that it once was in the early 2000s. There's also a conscious decision by many multinationals, both on the US side, but also European, Korean, Japanese, to adopt what's called a China Plus One investment strategy. That is to say, perhaps 20 years ago, they would have put all of their investment into China, which would have been the source for both domestic sales within China and exporting back to the rest of the world. Now, due to various reasons, including labor costs, geopolitical risks, investment strategy, they're doing what's called a China Plus One, which they may still invest in China, mainly for the domestic Chinese market. But there would be a second country, a plus one, often in Southeast Asia, which would be for export sales back to Japan or Europe or America. And Vietnam is one of the major countries in Southeast Asia that is attracting this interest, along with Indonesia and Thailand. There are supply chain issues, and this has been brought out by the fact what happened recently during the COVID shortage was COVID hit Vietnam very hard, particularly in 2021 when Ho Chi Minh City and much of the country were basically shut down. And of course, a lot of US consumer goods are made in Vietnam or goods are assembled in Vietnam drawing in components from other regions of the world. So the factories were either closed, and in some cases in Vietnam, the factories remained open, but the staff were actually forced to live on site in the factory in 2021 to keep producing due to strict COVID protocols. Also, it turned out that the infrastructure in Vietnam is not keeping pace with the rapid economic growth, particularly in the south. The ports, the airport, the roads need to be further developed. The infrastructure in the north and the capital area of Hanoi is better situated than the south, but that will be a constraint going forward for Vietnam. And we'll talk about their electrical grid a little bit later in the energy sector, but another issue will be their energy supplies. Education, as I mentioned, the population is quite well educated for Southeast Asia, but there are shortages of Vietnamese workers who speak English, and particularly for the higher level staff at companies, at the multinationals, college educated Vietnamese who speak English and have a background in production or finance, accounting or management. There's a shortage of those workers and they're at a premium. You may have heard that the Biden administration has unveiled a new proposal called the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is not a formal trade agreement like the former TPP, but it is an area of several different pillars of topics, of which the Department of Commerce and USTR are leading these conversations with various countries in the Indo-Pacific region. Vietnam is one of these countries. Vietnam has expressed strong interest in these meetings and has participated at the minister level. And some of the areas include supply chain issues and best practices, carbon, reduction of carbon, clean energy, things like that. Their post-COVID economic recovery has gone on quite strong. So there was a period of time in particularly 2021 when the country was largely shut down. They have rebounded fairly strongly. However, what we've been hearing from some of the member companies of the American Chamber of Commerce here in Ho Chi Minh City is that the past couple of months, there has been a slowdown in the Vietnamese economy, particularly in factory utilization, which has dropped. This is partly due to decreased demand in the United States and Europe and the fears of a recession. There was probably also overconsumption in Europe and the US during COVID. So a lot of consumer goods were ordered and purchased, and now the demand has fallen off. So in recent months, the factory utilization, particularly in some of the factories in the southern part of Vietnam, has fallen around 30%, by 30%. And the export figures very recently from Vietnam have fallen as well. Lastly, on a political level, you may have read that Secretary of State Blinken just visited Vietnam about 2 weeks ago. He went to Hanoi, actually to lay the cornerstone of our new embassy that's being built there, but there have been bilateral government conversations between Vietnam and the United States about elevating our partnership from what is officially called a comprehensive to a strategic partnership, which would imply closer ties in a variety of fields. Next slide, please. So Rob introduced the commercial service, and you can get on trade.gov for more information. But for those of you who don't know us that well, we're part of the US Department of Commerce. We primarily deal in export promotion. We have over 1,000 people. And you can see from our mission, we promote US exports. We promote advanced US commercial interests abroad, including advocacy, commercial diplomacy. If anyone's interested in that, we can talk during the question and answer session in more detail. And we also promote foreign direct investment into the US through a program called Select USA. And there's a slide about that program a little bit later. Next slide, please. And these are some of the major avenues through which we can help US companies do business in our respective markets. That includes business facilitation. The gold key is probably our best known program. That is where we will, for a small fee, we would research the market and arrange one-on-one meetings with a US company that's interested in doing business or exporting their good or service. And we would arrange one-on-one meetings with potential business partners or agents and distributors. We can also do trade promotion events. We market research and do counseling, particularly over the internet, to companies to try to determine if there's a good match in our market. And then there's advocacy and business counseling. Next slide, please. For the commercial service, we have 2 offices, one at the embassy in Hanoi and one at the U.S. Consulate General in Ho Chi Minh City, where I work. There are 4 American officers total, 2 in Hanoi, including our senior commercial officer, Steve Green, and we have 2 in Ho Chi Minh City, approximately 15 local employees. And we closely coordinate with AmCham Vietnam and the U.S. ASEAN Business Council. AmCham Vietnam, by the way, has 3 offices in Vietnam: Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh, and Da Nang. And U.S. ASEAN Business Council has an office in Hanoi. And they're both very, very good sources of information. Next slide, please.
Can I make a quick plug here?
Sure.
Or name drop anyway, that Steve Green used to be based in Honolulu. And
yes, that's correct. Yes.
And then also, I'm just going to jump back one slide real quickly, that some of these activities here, like the Gold Key service, there's a relatively small fee charged by the U.S. Commercial Service. But if you applied for company assistance from the HiSTEP program, that is one of the costs that could be reimbursed by the HiSTEP program for that kind of activity. So I'll just put that out there.
Good points. Thank you. Okay, as I mentioned in the overview of Vietnam, there's a lot of very positive trends in Vietnam and a lot of interest by US and other foreign companies in this market. So they're growing fairly rapidly with a growing middle class. Our bilateral political relationship between the United States and Vietnam is actually quite strong. There is a conscious effort by Vietnam to try to purchase more US goods. And of course, the location, it's in ASEAN, which is one of the fastest growing areas of the world with a very large youthful demographic population, not only in Vietnam, but in neighboring markets as well. The demographics here are much better than in Northeast Asia. So we'll go on to the next slide, please. Okay, and the next group of slides, I'm just going to go through very, very quickly because I'm not sure if the audience is involved in these industries or not, but we just wanted to highlight 4 major sectors that we've been working on quite a bit, and we see a lot of opportunity over the next few years. And then a brief summary of the Select USA program. So we can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so aviation, you will have access to this slide, so I don't need to read it to you, but there's a lot of predictions that the aviation market within Vietnam and then outside of Vietnam going to other markets will grow quite rapidly. There is a major plan to build a new airport in the Ho Chi Minh City area at Long Tan, which we're closely following. And that should also boost tourism and travel as well. So there's a great deal of demand for new passenger jets, and particularly some pent-up demand after about 2 years of COVID, where there was very little, if any, travel to and from Vietnam. We'll go on to the next slide, please. And again, this is just for your background information if you'd like to look at it, but a lot of new airports are being planned, and particularly the main one would be Long Tan Airport, which is just outside of Ho Chi Minh City. That will be built in the 2020s, and there's already discussions involving the Vietnamese government about getting procurement for that, and we'll actually be organizing an in-person event with the Airport Corporation of Vietnam in late June. There are other opportunities, including infrastructure, air traffic management. And you see the last bullet, maintenance, repair, and overhaul. One of Vietnam's objectives, particularly with the new Long Tan Airport, is to become an MRO hub, competing with Singapore, which is currently one of the major MRO hubs of the region. And that would be for other airlines outside of Vietnam to have some of their maintenance operations done within Vietnam. Next slide, please. Okay, now we'll go on briefly to energy, which is both an opportunity but also a challenge. So Vietnam has been using a lot of coal for its energy needs. It is rapidly trying to get off of coal and move to renewables. The government is in the process of working on and releasing its Power Development Plan 8, which is almost 2 years overdue, about the transition away from coal to renewables. There are a lot of opportunities for US companies, but there are challenges as well. And in particular, some of the challenges, well, why don't we go on to the next slide and we'll talk about some of the opportunities and challenges. So these are some of the opportunities, including LNG and smart grid, battery storage, solar and wind. So there's all sorts of this, and we try to highlight this at the last bullet in our recent trade wins trade mission that the Department of Commerce went to Southeast Asia. Some of the issues, frankly, are that it takes a long time for projects to get done in Vietnam, and the electrical grid is basically not sufficient for the demand. So there are scenarios in the future where, unless there's a lot more investment and the electrical grid is upgraded, there may be power shortages. And so the government of Vietnam is aware of that, and they're trying to modernize it. Go on to the next slide, please. Another major area of focus is healthcare, which is rapidly growing within Vietnam. The healthcare here is rapidly improving, although it is still not up to the standards of some other countries in the region, particularly like Singapore or perhaps Malaysia, but getting much better. There are opportunities for US companies, both pharmaceutical as well as medical devices. It can be difficult to get your license or have your license renewed. The Ministry of Health has been a bit slow on some of this, but it is improving. There are some significant opportunities because they do need to modernize their equipment, and some of the public hospitals are underfunded. So we'll go to the next slide, please. And because this is an area of opportunity, we had a big trade mission last year in 2022 that went to the region, including Vietnam. We've been doing webinars. So if anyone is in the medical field, please let us know. We'll get you in touch with our commercial specialists. We have one in Hanoi who covers more of the government policy, and then we have another commercial specialist in Ho Chi Minh who is more of the commercial opportunities in the South. So we'll get you connected with them. Next slide, please. And another area we're looking at are what is called smart cities, or ICT. There's a lot of major modernization going on in some of the major cities, such as Ho Chi Minh City, Da Nang, Hanoi. And we are looking for opportunities for US companies, either for hardware or software or consulting, to assist in this, which includes, for example, in Ho Chi Minh City, introducing an integrated emergency communication system and a new security operations center. So as these cities grow and modernize, there will be increasing demand for smart cities technology, and we see this growing over the next 10 years or so. Next slide, please. And these are some of the areas where we see a lot of opportunity, which not only pertain to smart cities, but also to ICT and other sectors as well, including cybersecurity. And next slide, please. As I mentioned, the Department of Commerce, we are involved in export promotion on exports or services going from the United States to Vietnam. We are also promoting foreign direct investment from Vietnam to the United States. That is done through our Select USA program, which is a Department of Commerce-led federal government initiative to encourage foreign direct investment. Actually, the summit is in next week, right outside of Washington, D.C. at National Harbor, Maryland. we have recruited a delegation of 28 Vietnamese delegates from 18 different companies to go there. Steve Green, our SCO, used to work in Honolulu. He is leading our delegation along with our ambassador to Vietnam, Mark Napper. And so it's that's an important strategy going forward. Okay, next slide, please. So you have some very good resources in Hawaii about doing business overseas if you have not done so before. Some of our thoughts about doing business in Vietnam is it is important to do your due diligence. When COVID hit and travel stopped between the US and Vietnam, including all business travel, there were no US companies that tried to do business over the internet without knowing who they were doing business with. And some of them got burned, unfortunately, with Vietnamese companies that did not ship the product or were unable to ship it. The US companies, in some cases, were not able to get refunds. So it's important to do your due diligence. It can, depending on the sector, it can take a number of years to successfully navigate, especially if you're involved in a big project, such as an infrastructure project, energy project, airport project. So you need to look at it as something that will go on for a couple of years, perhaps before you get the business. And you need to devote your resources, send your people over on perhaps multiple visits. For most American companies, we would strongly recommend that they find a local partner or local staff to serve as their representative or distributor or agent. Not only do they have the feel of the local market, they will have the local language skills. They will also be able to successfully navigate the Vietnamese bureaucracy, both at the federal government level and the provincial government level, and build those relationships that are important. And we'll go on to the last slide. So this is the contact information for the two officers in Ho Chi Minh City. Again, my name is Stephen. My colleague is Daniel Pint. Unfortunately, we will both be leaving our post this summer. Daniel's leaving in June. I'm leaving at the end of July. My successor will be Gregory Harris. But if you get in touch with our organization, you will get a hold of our successors, and so we will be very pleased to help you. And if anyone in the audience is interested in learning more about Vietnam, particularly for your particular company, please do not hesitate to contact me, and we'll be happy to set up a Teams call, Microsoft Teams call, to talk to you and learn more about your company. And that concludes my presentation. I will stay online. So I guess after the second presentation, I'll be available if anyone would like to have any questions. Thank you.
There's definitely some questions, and thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. I just wanted to put in a plug here locally for our John Holman. He's a U.S. Commercial Service Officer here in Honolulu, and he would be your primary window into the U.S. Commercial Service. And contact John first, and I'll send around his contact information. So, Stephen, you're kind of leaving us with a cliffhanger here. Where are you going? Where's your next?
Yeah, I'm actually retiring. So I have been with the commercial service for 25 years. And before that, I worked 10 years at the Department of Commerce in a different part of the International Trade Administration. So I spent 35 years in ITA. So I am going to retire. My wife and I are going to go to Washington, D.C. just for a couple of years until we decide what to do. I just wanted to mention that my former colleague and friend Dale Wright, who is online, actually introduced me to my wife 20 years ago when we were colleagues in Tokyo, Japan, and my wife actually asked me to send her best wishes to Dale.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. Great.
It's amazing. It's been 20 years.
It was 20 years ago this year, yeah, 2003. Wow. Yes, long time.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, with that, I'm going to jump over to Professor Tung. He's going to actually sit at my computer and speak while I pull up his presentation. Bear with me. Great. I'll sit here next to you, but basically you just use these arrows, all right, to go through.
Sounds like I'm teaching again here.
Yeah.
So good afternoon, everyone here and also from over the cyberspace. I have a very soft voice, so if you can hear me, please move up a little bit in the front row. Thank you so much for having invited me here. And hello, Steve, in Ho Chi Minh City. I guess one of the reasons I'm here is because of the fact that the business school at the University of Hawaii has the longest executive MBA program in Vietnam. And I've been running for the program for more than 16 years now. And we have about 1,000 alumni. And most of them actually are holding very important business positions in Vietnam. A few years ago, when Senator John Kerry went to Vietnam and he gave a talk at the National Assembly in Vietnam, celebrating the 20 years of business relationship with the US, he did mention that our MBA program in Vietnam was possibly the best foundation for establishing the business relations between the two countries, which is actually very true. 40% of our graduates actually are working for international companies, and most of them are working for American multinationals in Vietnam. And therefore, I think what I'm bringing to the table today is basically the networking that we have through our alumni base. And thank you, Steve, for mentioning the top areas in the potential areas in Vietnam: aviation, healthcare, and energy, and smart cities. And we have students, former students working as chief executive officers in all of those areas. And I myself sit in the board of directors of the largest agricultural companies in Vietnam, having more than 100,000 employees. So we do have good connections with Vietnam. And thanks to that network, I think if you have a made in Hawaii product, I think that is actually an instant recognition about the quality of the product that we export from the US to Vietnam. So I think that is probably the most, the contribution that I would like to bring to the group of the people that is here today. And I also I agree completely 100% with what Steve mentioned a little bit earlier in the previous talk. So basically, the only thing that I'm going to do now is to expand some of the things that he has mentioned.
I forgot to share the presentation with the online audience, so just bear with me one second.
Okay.
Okay, then
Okay, very good.
now okay.
So as an instructor, I always have a very long PowerPoint presentation. So I will fly them through. But again, one more time, I think the audience have access to my slide. So I just like to fly them quickly so that we have some time to do Q&A. So again, the bottom line is that I think 2023 is a good year for us to get back to Vietnam and do business there. And then, as Steve mentioned a little bit earlier, we need to do due diligence in the sense that we need to carefully identify the areas of opportunities, but also do very careful analysis before we get into the market. So again, this is part of the talk that I gave at Berkeley a month ago, when we talked about the rise of Vietnam as the economic power. As you can see quickly here, and as even Jacques mentioned it a bit earlier, Vietnam is becoming a major partner in the global supply chain process coming out from East Asia, which is basically a very important thing. And basically, Vietnam is basically present right now in all kinds of international endeavors that we can think about. And some statistics that we have, basically the same thing that Steve showed it earlier. And as Steve also mentioned, that Vietnam has recovered beautifully well from COVID-19. And then he also mentioned a little bit earlier that despite the 2 years of slowdown due to COVID-19, the oh, this is the oldest slide. Anyway, so the GDP growth for 2022 was 8%, 8.2% precisely. As you mentioned, Vietnam now is leading the lower middle income group, even ahead of India and the Philippines, and which is actually quite amazing if we consider that in the 1990s, Vietnam was one of the poorest countries in the world. Another thing that is actually quite interesting about Vietnam is that the indication of innovation actually is climbing really high. So every year or so, they climb by between 3 to 7 ranks. So in 2022, they are now ranked number 47 in the world in terms of the ability to convert innovation and put them into the market. So if you look at the data here that we got from the MIT database, one thing that is actually very interesting, whenever you see some picture about Vietnam, some beautiful pictures about Vietnam, we have a tendency to look at Vietnam as a country growing rice and coffee and fish and shrimps and seafood. But in fact, those consist only a very small portion of the economy right now. Vietnam is now becoming a major production of electronic stuff. Like Samsung, as Steve mentioned a little bit earlier, produced lots of Galaxy phone over there. And then if you go to Costco and you buy all of those networking gear, most of them are now made in Vietnam. So you can see that things have changed quite a bit. We always understood that Vietnam is about exporter of rice and coffee and these things and seafood, but in fact, it's becoming a very small portion of the landscape of the economy. And then if you look at why is it Vietnam is becoming so important in the global supply chain, is because of the fact that Vietnam is now sitting right in the middle of China and the United States, the two principal partners. I was just in Seoul about 3 months ago, and then South Korea has now identified Vietnam is going to be their largest partner in the next 5 years. And therefore, it is going to be a major supply chain hub of East Asia. So again, I think this is about the right time to partner with Vietnamese businesses to accelerate its integration to the world economy. The Vietnamese can help us, but we also can help them quite a bit. This is the good time to get in. So let me spend about 2 or 3 minutes talking a little bit about something that is even more important to me, is the political opportunity in terms of reshaping the global supply chain. And also, as Steve mentioned a little bit earlier, there was the issue about moving some of the production out of China, and Vietnam happens to be one of the favorite countries for a very simple reason. They are next to China, and as a consequence, anything is easier. Vietnam can import raw materials from China. The transportation system is a little bit cheaper because you just go by train or by trucks as opposed to go further away. And therefore, it is actually a major place. And then we hear all the time for the last 2 or 4 years or so, the rising tension between the two superpowers, China and the US. And then Vietnam is becoming just like the buffer between the two. So anything that happens between the two superpowers, you see a Vietnamese leader visiting the two countries recently. So this is something that is actually very interesting. Now, if you look at the relationship between the US and China, you can see exactly where Vietnam is is growing as well. So this is why I think either you go through Vietnam as a market or you go through Vietnam as a supplier. This is a huge opportunity for you to get in. And another thing that is actually very, very interesting that you already know is that the location of Vietnam is very strategic. So anything that is happens in terms of international trade has got to go through that South China Sea. The Vietnamese would argue the East Sea as opposed to South China. But then the bottom line is that this is the opportunity for you to be part of the global supply chain. Even if you have your production base in Vietnam, then likely you would be it would be easier for you to get into the global supply chain. So as Steve mentioned also in his presentation earlier, you could see that big firms, international firms are moving into Vietnam. So and then this is an example of what is happening after COVID. The Europeans, the USA, and Japan and Korea, they all decide to move to Vietnam. So if Japanese companies from China wanting to move to Vietnam, they even get a subsidy from the Japanese government to do that. So which is actually quite amazing. So let me supplement to Steve areas a little bit earlier. I would identify 2 additional aspects in addition to the 4 areas that he mentioned a little bit earlier. I would say the green economy is becoming a major aspect of the Vietnamese economy. And the second thing is equitization, which is, then I will talk to you a little bit as well. Vietnam used to be a primarily communist country. So most of the large companies used to be state-owned enterprises, and now they want to privatize them. So what does it mean? There is an opportunity for us to move in, do some sort of M&A in order to take over and improve the business. And if you do so, there would be quite a bit of incentive, fiscal incentive from the government to do that. So Vietnam is getting as polluted as China, and this is why they have a major national policy in order to do that. And again, this is another different angle of the same slides that Steve mentioned a little bit earlier. Urbanization, green city, smart city, all of these things actually are becoming very, very important for us to look into it. Where to invest in Vietnam? Well, it is a matter of preference. Vietnam, like most Asian countries in the world, and especially in Asia, there is a major urbanization process. Even if this is an agricultural country, but then the 2 biggest areas are going to be fully populated, and then we see almost on a daily basis farm workers are moving into big cities in order to become working for factories. Another area that I think it would be actually quite interesting is basically the dual use technology. What does it mean in the context of the global tensions that we have nowadays? Anything that we do that can help us into military applications would be actually quite interesting. So before I spend a little bit more time on that area, which I think there is a lot of opportunities for Hawaii businesses, I think equitization is a major call for participation right now from the Vietnamese government. They are requesting all of those state-owned companies to look for international partners in order to become more efficient and more effective. And in order to do that, they just passed 2 years ago a incredible policy in order to protect foreign investors. And honestly, when I look at the document, I'm just amazed about the fact that how much concession the Vietnamese government is willing to give away in order to attract foreign investment. So they do have a very aggressive plan in order to attract international investment. For the US in particular, I think there are 3 areas that you might want to look into here. And actually, I would put health in another slide. So I would say 4 of them: education. Vietnam has sent 25,000 students to the US, number 7th in the country right now in terms of international students in American universities. It went down a little bit due to the COVID pandemic and the high cost, but then the trend is very good. Education, American education is still perceived to be the best in the world. Technology, and then I will talk a little bit about dual use technologies later on. And obviously tourism is a major attraction that they do. So we do have quite a few companies in Hawaii in the construction business to help build resorts, hotel in Vietnam. Anything that we can think about helping with nuclear energy, manufacturing, defense, cybersecurity, all of these things are going to be extremely important for the country. And therefore, they would do anything in terms of investment policy in order to get international firm to work on it. Let's skip that one here, it's a bit too complicated. Unlike the traditional Department of Defense that we have in the US, the Ministry of Defense in Vietnam actually is a international company in itself. Not only they are in charge of defending the country, but they have all kinds of businesses, from telecommunications to fishing to everything. So if you want to minimize your risk, doing business with the Ministry of Defense in Vietnam actually turned out to be a pretty good thing to do. You have the backing of one of the most powerful agencies in the country. Last but not least here, again, as I mentioned, education, tourism, energy, food and beverages, and government. This is basically a possibility of a two-way interaction between our islands and Vietnam. I'm pretty sure the commercial service is going to be able to help you to set up businesses in Vietnam. I fully agree that one of the most critical success factor is to have a local partner that is willing to, that we can trust and do everything locally for us. There are certain things we don't want to get involved, so it's better to have the partner do the work for us. I'd just like to share with you a small anecdote. Our business school has 2 classrooms, 2 mini campuses in Vietnam, one in Saigon and one in Hanoi. And then when we signed the lease for the classroom and the office there, I have got to have the administration at the University of Hawaii to approve it. And then the central administration here got back to me and say, hey, Professor Bui, I want to know if we have a insurance for our students. Then I told them, what do you mean by that? They say that the state policy here is that we must have a $1 million insurance for our students. So if we have a student falling in the classroom, then we have insurance to cover the student for all of the medical care. when I get back to that issue in Vietnam, the Vietnamese counterpart was laughing at me. They say that if the Vietnamese students go to the campus, if they break something, we would find them, and not the other way around. so another important issue about partnership is like staffing. Again, I hired 9 staff in Vietnam, and then one day the HR officer from the university at Manua told me that, Professor Bui, this person has the same rank as another person that we have on campus at Manua. How come his pay is only 1/6 of what we pay him, the person here for the same title? Then I say, I understand, but it's a different market. But then because here we have different regulations, and then over there, therefore it would be nice to have a partner that would allow us to differentiate the cultures and the regulations between the two countries. So again, there are different ways of starting a business in Vietnam. I think the easiest thing to get started with is the representative office, so that you have the legal presence in order to start exploring your business, and you can keep expanding your business until you as you grow, you can change the legal form of your business as well. So I don't know if I should talk to you a little bit about this, but
Please.
but give me just one or 2 more minutes here. Etiquette in Vietnam. English is the favorite business language. So even I speak Vietnamese and I speak French. Anytime I speak in Vietnamese, they just look at me and they say, "Can we speak in French or in English?" Okay, that's fine. That would be good. The etiquette is that when you do a handshake, you also slide about the head a little bit. The business card should be given with 2 hands, and in Vietnamese we always go with the first name first, last name first, and then first name last. Okay, and one of the reasons is that because the historical reasons of Vietnam, in the good old times, under king's reign, everybody working under the king must convert all of their last name into the last name of the king. And so the Nguyen dynasty, for example, has lasted for centuries. And this is why 37% or so of Vietnamese have the same last name. So if you go out and you say, "Hey, I know a Vietnamese guy and his name is Nguyen," which one is that? There are at least 30 million Vietnamese who have the last name Nguyen. And this is why we use the first name. So instead of saying Professor Bui in Vietnam, they would say Professor Tung, because of the fact that first name is more rare than last name, which is actually quite interesting. Business attire in Hanoi, it's pretty much a white collar environment. Most of the government officials have dark color pants and white shirts. In Ho Chi Minh City, it's more business casual, pretty much like in Hawaii. And then men tend to wear white shirts, and women basically skirt and blouses. If you want to do business, try to do that in person. I think most Asian business people, including the Japanese and the Koreans and the Chinese as well, building trust is more important before they start to do business. So there's nothing better than meeting with people over a meal, which is much better than anything else. It would be good for you to exchange your agenda before you do the meeting, so that both sides can do the homework. It would be nice to have a third party in order to introduce the two of you together. It's still pretty much a commission-based economy to some extent. Exchanging gift is basically a tradition, and typically we do that at the end of the meeting. hierarchy and seniority are very important in Vietnam. If you are going to shake hand or give gift, then you give the gift to the most important guy first. But then the next one is to give the gift to the oldest person first, as opposed to a young, good-looking lady. Most deals requires multiple meetings, so don't expect that you cut the deal in the first meeting. Pretty much like the Japanese, they want to go out and drink sake with you for a while before they decided what to do. And then, like in business venture that we do in the US, any business proposal seems to be profitable and interesting to partner with. But at the end of the day, the business decision is based on how you want to, do you feel comfortable to partner with this person? So that thing is very important. So even if you have this beautiful business proposition, it might not work if you don't find that friendship or trust connection. And this is something that you have got to be very careful about. Even I am a former Vietnamese person with 20 years of experience in business and teaching in Vietnam. I always get confused about the Vietnamese yes. If they tell you yes, 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 it doesn't mean that you get a deal. Yes, it's basically that, oh, okay, I hear you. Let me think about it. So don't just go home and tell your wife that I got a deal. Okay, it's not there yet. So you should be a little bit cautious in your optimism about this kind of thing. So I understand that I don't know exactly what you are looking for this presentation. So the presentation is very broad, but then I would be more than happy to talk to you thanks to the connection that we have in Vietnam.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Wonderful. If you don't mind, could you just sit here close to the microphone because there will be some questions. Thank you. Let me get this off of here. Go to Jamie, there was one question for you from early in the program, talking about the HiSTEP program and the pavilions. Is this the same program as the pavilion that does international food shows such as Gulf Food? And if so, if we registered and applied last year, do we re-register in HiSTEP and apply again in November?
We're talking about register.
No,
You need to register for HiSTEP annually,
okay.
and then you want to apply for company. That's two different things. Registering for HiSTEP and applying for company assistance are two different.
Okay, so let me just repeat. Register for HiSTEP every year and apply for company assistance every year. It's two different processes, but do they do that through DBEDT or is that HDOA?
Oh, it depends.
This is Gulf Food.
Yeah, Gulf Food is
So they would go through HDOA, but HiSTEP is behind supporting all of that too. Okay, I hope that answers that question there. And yes, regarding the slides, I will send around the slides to everybody, both sets of slides and the contact information for all of our speakers today. The professor, here's your pen. Let's see. It's not a question, but it's related. We are doing an event here on May 25th. It'll be a webinar and a live seminar called Working with AmChams, American Chambers of Commerce, and the U.S. Commercial Service. That's just a specific event for that. So please stay tuned for that. I think that'll be really interesting. That's the first time we've ever done that. Some of our companies have some experience with the U.S. Commercial Service, but not with so much with the American Chambers of Commerce around Asia or other parts of the world. And I think that'll be an interesting event. So one of the questions, I think this is probably for Professor Bowie, but Stephen, you certainly chime in if you have something interesting on this. How are Vietnamese Americans? Are they going to Vietnam and starting businesses and getting things going there like entrepreneurially, or how is that working?
Actually, there are quite a few in our member program, in our MBA program in Vietnam. We have about 10% of Vietnamese Americans in the program. So about 70% of them are Vietnamese Americans, and we have quite a few just Americans.
Oh,
And we do have quite a few veterans as well. We are the only program in Vietnam that got paid, that the VA is paying for.
oh,
So so if they get I used to have a couple of veterans, US veterans. They go to Vietnam, they got $3,000 for stipend, and they pay food, tuition, and therefore with $3,000 in Ho Chi Minh City, the quality of life is practically portable.
oh. Okay, great. Stephen, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we have also seen an increase in what is called the VietQ, or overseas Vietnamese population in the US, coming back to Vietnam to do business and for investment, particularly the younger generation as Vietnam grows. So yes, that is a trend that we are noticing as well in Ho Chi Minh City.
Okay, the next question is, let's backtrack for a second and think about our Hawaii companies and what are smaller, well, maybe not even smaller. Most of our Hawaii companies are now moving towards organic types of products. It doesn't even have to be agriculture, but we have a lot of skin cream, skin lotion and cosmetics companies, sunscreens, that sort of product. Even our textiles, people are looking for organic cottons and things like this. How is the Vietnam domestic market? Is that type of organic product developing, the need for that, the demand, so that our Hawaii companies could satisfy that? And take with it that we understand that those products are going to be more expensive than sort of non-organic product. We know that it's a premium price already. So I just,
well, perhaps I can jump in and then I'll turn it over to the professor. So we have recently seen a number of US companies marketing their organic products in Vietnam. Rob, you're correct. It is seen as a high-end, sort of a expensive or luxury product, but there is definitely a demand for it. And there are, depending on the product, there are agents and distributors that are very interested in serving as representatives for such products, particularly if they're from the US or Japan or Europe, which are seen as high quality organic products as well.
you have any comments?
Yeah, I fully agree. As Steve mentioned in his presentation earlier, I think there is a steady rise of the middle class population. And then as people get more comfortable, health is becoming very important to them. And I think anything that is related to healthcare and skincare and cosmetics, because of the Korean wave of K-opera, K-drama, actually making healthcare and cosmetic care very important in Vietnam. I think the biggest challenge that we need to do is basically working on branding. Brand in Asia is everything. From a sarcastic perspective, we marketing researchers would argue that branding is a consequence ignorance. I don't know anything about the product, then I just rely on the known brand. So if you don't have a good brand, then you need to figure out how to work on it. Trust is everything. They, unfortunately, in many countries in Asia, and Vietnam is not an exception, there are lots of fake products. the Vietnamese police recently caught a few factories in Vietnam that even duplicates supplements from Kirkland, from Costco. And therefore, whatever you do, and I was standing, and we were discussing a little bit earlier, Randall, that we need to figure out how to preserve the quality and the originality of the product in order to penetrate into this market.
You just remind me of something. I was just in Vietnam most recently, a couple months ago, in Ho Chi Minh City and in Hanoi. But I do not remember seeing a Costco. Is there a Costco in Vietnam?
There's no Costco.
Oh, but they'll be coming. I think we can
They
count.
are buying a lot of things from Vietnam.
We can count on that.
They have two questions.
Please. Sure. Let me repeat the question from the audience. The live audience here was about e-commerce and how big it is, or how that is it growing. Stephen, do you have a comment on that? Local e-commerce in Vietnam?
Yes, it's growing quite rapidly. Actually, Vietnam has a very tech-savvy population. As I mentioned, with the youthful demographics, virtually every adult has a smartphone. Internet usage is very, very high. There's a lot of internet ordering going on, a lot of delivery. If you spent time in Ho Chi Minh City and tried to walk on the sidewalks, you will often see motorcycle delivery people zooming around you, carrying packages and food deliveries to their customers. So yes, it's growing very rapidly. There are some issues with the national government in terms of digital protection and privacy. I'm not an expert on those regulations. That tends to be maybe more for the larger companies. But overall, the market is quite strong and growing rapidly, and I would assume it would continue to do so.
Is Amazon yet available in Vietnam?
Amazon, you can order Amazon, I believe, from Singapore, but it would require being shipped from Singapore, and it would have customs. But there are other online delivery vendors within Vietnam.
In order fulfillment.
And actually, they have an app called Grab, which is like Uber. Grab is a Singapore company, but there's a Vietnamese subsidiary. And on Grab, you can order almost anything, particularly like a rental car or a car or motorcycle to take you around, but food deliveries, shopping, you name it. And there are other apps like that as well, where you can buy almost anything over the internet and have it delivered to your home or apartment.
Okay. Professor, your comment led me into my next question, that if you can imagine out in the world, Hawaii has a good reputation because of just the Hawaii 5-0 TV show and the beaches and the palm trees and it's wonderful, right? Especially Japan, Korea, Europe, Canada, they think about Hawaii as sort of paradise. Does the average person in Vietnam know anything about Hawaii? Do they care anything about Hawaii?
Yeah, I think they do. Even when I was a kid 50 years ago, during the wartime, I still heard quite a bit about Hawaii. So I think we do have that brand and that image, and I think we should take advantage of it. A few years ago, I was asked to be a consultant of a province in the South. And the reason is that they would like to duplicate the success of tourism in Hawaii.
Oh.
So we do have that image and that recognition.
So is there a surfing beach culture growing in Vietnam?
Surfing, not yet, but resort hotels are plentiful everywhere.
Question in the back. Yeah.
So this is my question for the professor and electronics, right? The manufacturing Samsung, is that contract manufacturing or in-house?
What do you mean?
With Samsung, right? Is that contract manufacturing or are they doing in-house?
I can answer that it's mostly contract. There is a Samsung Vietnam that is a customer of mine, but they mostly do it by contract through like a Foxconn-ish arrangement.
Question is the culture of it, right? The e-waste. How does country accept like raws or e-waste from like the US coming into Vietnam to be processed?
It's a very sensitive issue. I'm glad that you asked about that. The Vietnamese, for some reason, they are very careful about it. And it went over a few years ago when they even forbid the import of used vehicles.
So you guys don't accept raw or e-waste materials?
No. I mean, Vietnam is trying to avoid the mistake that China has done in the past. So, and having said that, pollution in Vietnam is very high, especially in the plastic area.
Robert.
Yeah, question part is for both of you. For Steve, you mentioned that the economy looks like it's been slowing down recently. I wonder if any reasons, a major reason behind that. You see it's kind of short-term correction, or it's a maybe long-term concern in their economy.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Can you say it one more time?
I think Steve mentioned that recently the economy is some kind of sign of slowing down. My first part is wonder what are the reasons behind that, maybe the slowing down. And then the second part is whether this is kind of short-term fluctuation or is it really a long-term structural issue of the slowing down.
I see. Steve, could you hear that question?
No, I didn't. Could you please
Okay.
repeat it?
Sure. You mentioned during your talk that the economy had recently sort of slowed down. And the question is, why was it slowing down? And the follow-on is that temporary, or is it expected to rectify and grow again? Could you just spend a minute on that?
Sure. We have heard reports from some of the AmCham Ho Chi Minh City Board of Governor members, particularly in executives in the areas of production and logistics, that there has been a slowdown in the Vietnamese economy, particularly in the South. And some of the statistics they had heard was that industrial production, primarily for exports in the South, was down about 30% if you compare it to the previous year. Part of this is due to the slowdown in demand from the United States and Europe. There was a very large increase in demand during COVID, perhaps excessive demand. There were inventories that were built up as inventories had still maintained that they were not placing as many new orders. There were also issues on the supply chain blockages. Those have been largely resolved. So the excess demand going to Vietnam, perhaps from other countries that had supply chain issues as well, that has also abated. There was also a long shutdown during Tet, partly due to the holiday, but partly because companies had reduced demand. They were shutting down a number of their factories in southern Vietnam to get production in line with demand. Whether this is a long-term or a short-term, I think would partially also depend on the real estate market. There are observers here that think there is a slowdown in the real estate market, particularly in Ho Chi Minh City, and a correction going on. There was one executive at a bank who thought that by the year's end, calendar year 2023, that this correction would be over. There was another executive colleague who thought that this would probably go on for quite a long time. Not a recession, but merely a slowdown in the growth, in part due to non-performing real estate loans. So in short, the slowdown over the past couple months has primarily been to decrease demand from overseas market, primarily the United States and Europe. Production has slowed accordingly. And then there are also issues about the real estate market and non-performing real estate loans which depending on the observer, people think will either be short and end this year, or it could be more prolonged. Thank you.
Great. If you were a small Hawaii company and you had to pick one market, one geography to get involved in Vietnam, which do you think it would be first? Would you go to Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi?
Yeah, if it's a consumer product, I would probably start in Ho Chi Minh City. So Hanoi is also a large market in itself, and of course, covers northern Vietnam. But about 60% or more of the economic activity is down in the south near Ho Chi Minh City. And a lot of the distribution networks are also down here. So to start off with, if you had to choose one or the other, I would probably choose Ho Chi Minh City, but you could easily do both. You could do one trip and go to both cities and have a gold key in both cities.
I suppose that with an operation like where you have one major city in the far north and one major city in the far south, that you probably have representatives and distributors who specialize in just those markets, right?
That is often the case. That is often that they'll have a distributor in the north for Hanoi and a distributor in the south. Depending on their product service, they may also have a third one in Da Nang, which is also rapidly growing.
Sure. Okay, let's talk very briefly about logistics. And so now, post-pandemic, do you know, how do you get to Vietnam from here? I went through Korea. There wasn't a direct flight.
I also go Korean Airlines, but you can go Japan Airlines, so you can go Ava Airlines.
There's no direct flight.
There's no direct flight. But you can fly back to LA or Seattle.
How do you ship product by, I'll get to you in just a second. How do you ship product by ocean then? Can you ship directly from the port of Honolulu to Haiphong?
I don't think so.
You probably have to go through Shanghai or somewhere.
Or you go back to Long Beach, then we go.
Yeah, but that's expensive. Okay, sir.
Most effective flight from here by ANAs and United and not to resume service. I fly to Vietnam frequently. ANA to Narita, and then we take ANA down to Saigon.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to shipping, if you come from Los Angeles or if you come from Miami, for example, your containers need to be 40-foot containers, and you can go via Manila to the Haiphong, but you don't go to China because you have a problem with going from 45 days in transit shipping to 57 days. So you want to make sure that your freight forwarder knows exactly the size of container you would be using for shipping product. And also, how does it go across the ocean? And the most common gateway can be wrong, but the other one is moving.
It's interesting. Okay. Let's see. Oh, for communication, most of the people in Vietnam that I communicate with, I use WhatsApp. Is that still the primary
Very popular,
one?
yes.
Is that the main one? There used to be a more Vietnamese specific.
WhatsApp is now.
What was it called? Valo, Nalo, something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah, or just texting, because texting is free anywhere now.
Facebook Messenger, people can call free Messenger.
Yeah, Facebook Messenger.
Everybody in Vietnam is on Facebook now.
Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp.
WhatsApp.
Well, that's the same company. That makes sense.
Or Viber, but Viber is much less.
Yeah, Viber. Viber is really Philippines. Randy.
Yeah, so from the slides that were presented by both of you, you mentioned that healthcare seems to be as far as booming areas, maybe 2 or 3. We are in that space of healthcare. We're in Hawaii nationally, and we just started to white label into Taiwan. So my question is, with the growing middle class sector and probably your higher end sector, what we offer is something that in the US and in Hawaii, embrace, which is health and longevity. But what we've come out with is this anti-inflammatory, anti-aging health supplement that now is backed by the NIH that says that it extends lifespan. And so we're going to be making a big announcement in about 2 weeks. And the UH is going to do a press conference on us. So my question to you is this, how difficult is it? And I know, you know, populations don't vary in the behavior, that they will want not only health, but longevity. So how difficult is it for a company like ours to come into the Vietnamese market? And how difficult and challenging is it to get through the Department of Ministry of Health, as we call it here, the FDA? And does the health supplements have very stringent protocols to come in? Because now it's going to be anti-aging, longevity, and it's an anti-inflammatory health.
The short answer to me is that yes, the Ministry of Health in Vietnam is very peculiar and difficult to work with. Yeah, but then there are always ways to go around it
With the right partner,
with the right partner.
the right partner can make anything happen.
Yeah. Would you suggest that's not even coming in because we don't have the bandwidth, but we white label it and have someone there run with it?
Well, again, we need to talk with it in more detail. But again, I think branding is very important. Making sure that the product is trusted, and then so how do you build it up?
Yeah, we have a lot of, we've been on the market now for 7 years. We've been in development for 10 years. And it actually was the #1 selling product in all the GNC stores in Hawaii. And now it's the doctors and the pharmacists that are embracing it and recommending it and so on. So we brought in the medical sector as well. So yeah, we have a lot of.
Yeah, I think with your track record, and you have a good website and marketing and all of that stuff, it's easy for the, let's call it the VFDA. They see that and they know that you're a legitimate going concern with a good product that's had some FDA contact and whatever. And I think if you're able to show them all that with the right partner and some translation and what have you, I'm sure you could get it moving there. But if you were to just show up in Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi tomorrow and say, here, I'd like to start the testing process and all of that, it'd be, you know, the pigs will fly before you get it in there. But I think if you go there with a plan, and I'm sure there's a consultant you can find who could walk you right through the process.
And again, we don't have the bandwidth to come in and open up distribution centers. We would probably find someone there that's willing to bring it in, or white label our product, put it under their label. But we have the product.
I think that is a good move. I mean, advertisement cost is really expensive in Vietnam.
Yeah. The language barrier, the understanding of how this is conducted there, we don't have that. So probably finding, you know, that person that can bring it in and do all of that. We just selling them, you know, the product itself, like people that. So we can talk to them.
That's what commercial services.
Yeah, talk to Stephen, the commercial service. All right, with that, there's no more questions in the queue, and all my questions by text and email are answered. So with that, I'm going to close because we're a bit over time, but I'd like to thank very much Jamie Lum from DBEDT and Stephen Jacques from the U.S. Commercial Service in Ho Chi Minh City, and of course our Professor Tung Bui from University of Hawaii Shidler School of Business. So thanks so much for sharing your expertise on this. Again, I will be sending out a link to the slides and the agenda. The video will be up in a few days, and I remind you about our upcoming meeting on May 25th, 9 a.m. here at the Foreign Trade Zone and by Zoom on working with American Chambers of Commerce and the U.S. Commercial Service. So thanks again, everybody.